Welcome to the Deal by Me podcast, where we ask guests to tell us your story. Hello there. This is Dr. James W. Smith, your host. We seek to transform lives by encouraging and inspiring. Someone encouraged and inspired this host, a former lawyer, gambler, inmate, and his life was transformed. The same can happen to you. So when you listen to any of the Deal by Me podcasts, please support this ministry with a donation or a monthly recurring amount for as little as $3. I want to give a shout out to Reverend Quincy Davis for his support to the Deal by Me podcast. Check out my encouraging, inspiring, and transforming books. I'm available for speaking engagements, in person, and virtual seminars. So please contact me through my website, www.dealbyme.com. I have with me Bobbi Kahler, who is an entrepreneur for more than 20 years. She has coached upwards of 3,000 people and has delivered presentations to tens of thousands of people. She helps people to see new possibilities for themselves and for their lives. And I know there's going to be much more that we're going to talk about as Bobbi shares with us today. First of all, Bobbi, let me ask you to share a little bit about yourself and where you've been interviewed from today.
All right. Well, like you say, my name is Bobbi Kahler, and I'm actually right now, we split our time. We have two homes. And today we are in our home here in Northwest Arkansas. And the rest of the, and part of the year we spend out in Colorado in the high country, up around 9,000 feet. So both places are beautiful because we love the outdoors. We love being active. A little bit about myself. Um, like you say, I've coached a lot of people in my life, and I've reached a point, James, where I'm not doing as much coaching anymore because I want to have a bigger reach. And when you're coaching, it's only one on one, so I'm really scaling back there. I'm focused on my podcast, and I'm more focused on how do I take what I've learned over the last 20 plus years in coaching, plus my grad school degree and all, what I learned in grad school and everything, and how do I take that and put that out to the world so that people can help themselves, so they don't just have to say, well, if I can't afford a coach, I'm stuck. No, there's a lot of things you can do on your own, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Bobbi, I've looked at your profile and just very excited about the work you do and your background. And I noticed when I first looked at it, uh, you start off with one sentence, and that is, "There is always a way forward." That's a really interesting statement now. So, can you just talk a little bit about what you really mean when you make that statement?
Yeah, that is one of my most fundamental beliefs, that there's always a way forward. Sometimes we might sometimes we shut ourselves down and we don't see all the options.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we think, well, I don't like that option. So it's, there's no way forward, but there's always a way forward. And I think that a few things have happened in my life um, that have really made me believe it. At a very young age, I was diagnosed with what a speech pathologist said were catastrophic speech problems. He told my mother I would never speak correctly. It took a while,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have speech problems anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that happened is I grew up, I would say, very humbly. Like, I grew up on a farm. When I was 23, I was working two jobs. I was barely keeping my head above water, and I didn't know how to work any harder than what I was working.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wait a minute, there's still a way forward. I just have to bring in new insight. And then the big thing came when I was 37. That was back in 2003. And on March 6th, actually, of 2003, I woke up and I could no longer raise my arm to brush my teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And that set off like a 10-year journey where I had multiple doctors tell me, you shouldn't be alive. I had one doctor say, you've got to, only for people who have what you have only 3% of them will experience a full recovery. And even in those moments, I thought, there is a way forward.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if when, like, for example, when he said the thing about the 3%, I had a friend of mine, his name's Paul, years afterwards. He said, Bobbi, why didn't you give up when you heard that doctor say that 97% of people wouldn't experience a full recovery?
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a minute to understand what he was asking me. And I said, Paul, that's not what I heard. I heard that 3% would. So what that
Mm.
means to me is that I had to find that 3% or the doctors who treated them.
Mm.
Because again, my belief is there's always a way forward.
Wow, wow! I love that. While we're on this this way forward, uh, what are some of the common roadblocks then that keep people from moving forward? You know, some people want to do a little bit more, but there's always something. It can be family, it can be money, it can be a lot of things that kind of hold them back. You know, you want to do it,
Mhm.
but something keeps you from moving in that direction. So, talk about these roadblocks.
Yeah. There, and you're right. You've identified a couple of them:
Okay.
family
Hmm.
and money. And, surprisingly enough, family is not always our biggest supporter for some of us. For some
Hmm.
people, it is, and that's
Hmm.
fantastic. But here are a couple of the common ones. One is, I call it fighting what is.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is the day after the afternoon when we got that diagnosis about the 3%, we went home and Rick, he's my husband now, he's boyfriend at the time. We went home and we were sitting in our living room and he said, this isn't fair. I'm really sorry. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? It doesn't matter if it's fair.
Hmm.
It is. This is what I have to deal with. And I think that was one of the big gifts for me from that experience, because up until that time, I did fight like, well, this isn't fair. It shouldn't be this way. This
Hmm.
isn't right.
Hmm.
But but intuitively I knew I didn't have the energy to waste on fighting what is. And in
Hmm.
having coached as many people as I have, we often do that. We get stuck in that trap of this isn't fair, it isn't right, and we spend all of our energy and our brain cycles on that.
Hmm.
So that is one of the biggest barriers.
Okay, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm intrigued by you. I'll be very honest. Your background and things that you've done and how you've come through is very fascinating and also exciting. And I know listeners of this podcast will be very, very excited to hear what you are saying. I'm this forward is kind of interesting to me. When I saw the first paragraph, I mean the first sentence, that was you hit that out of the park because I really want to know what's going on with this.
Yeah.
So what can you do when you really don't know? You know how to get started or move forward.
Yeah.
Now we talked about the roadblocks, but when when you're trying to do something, I know I just started this podcast. I retired and I wanted to do something else that I thought would be encouraging, inspiring, transforming, and getting started was a challenge. So talk to uh, listeners out there a little bit about you know when you really don't know how to get started, what to do.
Yeah. And thank you for your kind words. That's very, very sweet of you. So there are a few things that you can do, and I think of them as three major buckets. The first one, I call it prime your mind, and this is mindsets.
Hmm.
These are happiness strategies, and these are things that have been proven by researchers and by science. And I've also used them for myself. So prime your mind is one. The second bucket is what we were kind of talking about: remove barriers. And I've seen six main or common barriers, and people don't have all of them, right? But
Hmm.
there are six common barriers that I've seen over the years. And so what we want to do is identify which one of those might be affecting me, and then how do I remove them. And then the third bucket is take action. Because to me, action is the antidote for despair.
Mm.
Nothing happens unless we take action. Like when you were starting your podcast, it started with a small action, most likely. When I started my
Mm.
podcast in
Mm.
2020, I knew nothing. I mean, I
Mhm.
knew less than nothing.
Mhm.
I had a lot to learn, but it started with the idea I want to start a podcast, and then it's
Mhm.
like, okay, well then, how do I learn?
Mhm.
What do I need to learn? So those are the three main buckets. So, like for example, with Prime Your Mind, this is one of my favorite strategies from that one. It's something called the Tetris effect. Did you ever play Tetris back in the day?
No.
It was
No.
a video game. Oh my goodness.
No.
It was amazing. It was all these boxes that would move around, and they were shapes, and you had to kind of stack them together.
Mhm.
And it was fascinating. Like it was such a great game. And researchers at Harvard, they had people play Tetris for, I don't know, 6,
Mm.
7 hours straight, something like that. And what happened is after they played Tetris for that many hours, and for any of your listeners who have played Tetris, they'll probably relate to this. For I don't know how many hours it was afterwards, but when these people went out into the world, all they could see were these box-like shapes, like cars looked like boxes, bricks, and their minds started thinking about how do these shapes go together. And researchers have called that the Tetris effect.
Mm.
And the big takeaway from that is that we see what we train our brain to see.
Mm.
So when you're playing Tetris, you're training your brain to see shapes, boxes, and how they can fit together. And
Oh.
so what they've done is they took that and they said, is the same true in everyday life? And the answer is yes.
Mm.
So if we train our brain to see the negative, we will see more of the negative. If we train our brain to see more of the positive things, that's what we'll see. So, quick example with the when I was in my recovery. So I told you it took 10 years,
Mhm.
and it took about 2 years in before the doctor said, "Okay, you can go out and you can start taking walks," because I was always an athlete.
Mhm.
I was a runner before I got sick, and the my first walk was to the end of our driveway, which was like 20 feet long, and I barely made it back in the house. I collapsed on the couch, and I think I went to sleep for I don't know how many hours.
Mm.
But the next day, I went back out. I did the same thing, and I added 2 steps in. And so I focused on what's my progress, and
Oh.
that's what I trained my brain to see, my
Mm.
progress. So when we're starting something new, we have a choice. We can either see our progress,
Mm.
or we can focus on where we're falling short, what we don't know, all the, you know what I mean? So what we
Mm.
train our brain to see, we're going to see more of, and that's going to inspire us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. A whole lot of sense. You really as a pastor, we'll use this word preaching to the choir. You 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 preaching to me right now because I'm getting all of this. This is good information, and I know listening to this podcast is going to be really excited. This is awesome, and I hear you. It's I'm just so I guess caught up in how you have moved forward and how you talk about keeping your brain on the positive because most people
Yeah.
uh do think about, oh my god, this is tough, but that little
Hmm.
progress they make, they forget all about that, and your position is keep focus on that, train your
Yep.
brain to move on that positive aspect, which is
Yeah.
is is great. And I guess that brings me into another aspect that I get from what you talk about, because we can get stuck in this too now. You know, we can get to a point where we say, I'm not going any further. I can't do anything. So
Mm.
I'm going to ask you this question then: how can someone get unstuck, and what is the number one trap that keeps people stuck? So I'm
Okay.
going both ways here.
All right. So let's start with the number one thing that keeps most people stuck in that regard.
Okay.
And this is just based on what I've seen. It's that, in my coaching, people think they have to have the entire plan before they get started.
Okay.
And that's not true.
Mm.
You do not have to have the entire plan. In fact, you can't. usually you can't have the entire plan, because once you start taking actions and you get a little bit down the road, you know, new data is going to come in or things are going to change and you're going to have to adapt. So
Mm.
you don't have to have the whole plan
Oh,
before you start.
mm. Okay.
So that's a huge barrier. Now, the other part of that was, oh, what can you do when you feel stuck?
Mm-hmm.
If the, There's a few things. And this is why the third bucket's called take action. I'm a huge believer in taking action, even if it's small action. I've got a process I can share there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other piece of that, though, before I share, it's what I call the AAA, and it's a simple thing that people can use. The other thing that can happen, though, is sometimes because you said, like, sometimes we go as far as we can,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's like, okay, now what? When you hit one of those moments, I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is try to bring in new information.
Okay.
Reach out to people who are playing the game that you want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to them. Like I get people, and they reach out and they're like, "Hey, I'd like to become a coach. Can I talk to you for 30 minutes?" Of course.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to help people that way. I don't have the magic answer, but I can share what my journey was.
Mm-hmm.
So when you reach out to people in that way, you're bringing in new information and new insights,
Mm.
because sometimes that's what we need,
Mm.
right? Like, that was a big deal for me back when I was 23. I had learned, like, I was doing what everyone else in my close network, what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So to learn something new, I had to get outside of that network. I had to meet new people.
Mm.
So that's one of the simplest things we can do.
Okay.
The other part of that is with the taking action. I'm just a believer that nothing happens without action. Because as soon as we take an action, we have the opportunity to learn,
Mm-hmm.
even if it is a failed action.
Mm.
And even if the action fails, we learn from it and we also build confidence. So the triple A that I call it, it is, so the first A is for action.
Mm-hmm.
Take some action, doesn't matter if it's small, whatever that is. The second step is to assess.
Okay.
How did that action go? So
Mm-hmm.
um, let's say I'm trying to become a better communicator,
Mm.
whatever,
Okay.
So I take an action and I say, I'm going to have a conversation with someone and it's going to be, about this.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can go back and I say, okay, how did that go?
Mm.
Did it go well?
Mm-hmm.
If it did go well, what were the positive things about it? How did I contribute to those positive things? And if it didn't go as well as I wanted, then I could say, okay, well, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
And then the important question there is, what could I do differently in the future?
Okay.
Because when we ask ourselves that question, we're training our brains. It's like we're training our brain muscle, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to act differently in the future.
Okay.
And so that's the assess part. And then finally, adapt is to try it out.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so I made my assessment. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to try again and see what happens. And then you start the process all over again. And the reason I really tried to simplify that is essentially a coaching process that I've used thousands of times
Mm.
as I've coached sales leaders, salespeople, managers,
Mm-hmm.
and it sets them up so that they start doing that for themselves, and then I'm no longer needed.
Mm.
And that's what I ultimately want. I don't want people to be dependent on me.
I
They
got
can
you.
do this for
I got you.
themselves.
So,
Yeah,
so you want to get them to a point in life where they are able to move forward on their own.
that's right.
Okay, makes sense.
That's right. And
Makes lots of
and
sense.
like I've had a coach. I've had a coach, James, since 98, 96, a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Her name's Maria. And I don't talk to Maria every month or every week. In fact, there are years that go by that I don't talk to her. But
Mm-hmm.
it's nice to know if I need to call her, I
Right.
can. I
Okay.
can have and it's funny when I reach out to her, I'm like, Maria, I need a checkup.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or I need a tune up,
Right.
you know. But yeah, that's what she did for me. She taught me how to do these things for myself. And I think that's the ultimate.
Okay. That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Um, Bobby, I've said earlier that I was, went into doing podcasting about 6 or 7 months ago. Actually, what I did, uh, I really started about, I guess, 3, 4 months before I retired from
Mm.
my pastorate. I pastored for uh, 2 months short of 33 years, same church. And it was an amazing experience. I truly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But what I said to myself, I wanted to continue my ministry with something. So that's the reason I started the podcast, to kind of encourage, inspire, and hopefully transform lives. And so every guest that comes on, I like to ask them, and or I do ask, if someone is struggling with something, and it and I like this forward look you're talking about. If they're struggling with moving forward, or if they are doing uh, any kind of thing and they seem like it's a challenge for them or whatever it is, or they're going through some situations in their lives, uh, what would you say to them that will be encouraging, inspiring, and maybe hopefully transforming? Is there a word that you will share with listeners of this podcast?
Hmm. I think it comes down to really believing that there is a way forward.
Okay.
Because the way our brains work, if we think there is a way forward, our brains will continue to look for that way.
Mm,
If we say to ourselves, I'm stuck, there's no way out of this, we just ended the conversation.
mm,
And our
okay.
brain stops scanning for those options.
Mm,
So that's one. And the other thing I would say, it's related to taking action. I said this, earlier when I said that I think action is the antidote for despair,
mhm,
because action is one of those amazing things that when we take action, we feel hopeful.
mm,
When we feel hopeful, we take more action. So it fuels itself. So just, really hang on to those two things.
okay. Oh,
That's what I would say there.
well said. Thank you so much. Because a lot of listeners of this podcast are dealing with something. They're looking for
Yeah,
some encouraging words, some inspiring words that will actually move them along. And I get feedback, so I know that's the case. I was going through
hmm,
something, and I listened to one of your podcasts, and oh boy, it really lifted me. This type thing. So
that's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So I'm grateful for that. Uh, Listeners, hang on with us. Don't go any place, because we got a few more uh, questions and good conversation to have with Bobbi. But I want to give Bobbi now the opportunity to share with listeners of this podcast how they can learn more about you, how they can get your books, or any other information that you might have that would be a benefit to them. Would you share that with us now?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for asking. So,
Mhm.
probably the best way is through my website, which is just www.bobbykahler.com. And there you'll find, um, I've got a newsletter. Of course, it's free. I just launched this. It's a free 5-day email course, and it's called Thriving Forward, Master Your Inner Game for More Happiness, Well-Being, and Success.
Mm,
And that course dives into these three buckets that we've been talking about. So I just launched that and it's free. If people sign up, that'd be great. I'd love feedback to know if it's helpful, what
mm,
I could add to it, because that's my goal with that.
okay.
It also on my website, I have my podcast, Unyielded Thriving No Matter What, that people can tune into. As far as the book, it is on the website. You can also still order it through Amazon, I believe. And if anybody wants a hard copy and an autographed copy,
Hmm.
they can shoot me an email, which I think I have a contact form on the website,
Okay.
and I can send that as well.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for giving us that information. Um,
Yeah,
back talking, getting back to this way forward. This is amazing. I mean, I just love this forward. It's just the opposite of backwards, so that's what makes me excited.
you want to go forward, yeah.
That's what makes me excited. So what is learn your way forward. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but I'm just excited about it. So,
Yeah.
is there a definition for this? Learn your way forward. Is there a definition for it, or just something that you share to let your people that you coach, know what they should be doing?
It's kind of, well, number one, it's kind of a philosophy, right? Because we
Okay,
always hear that,
okay,
you know what I mean? We always hear that. We always hear, you can learn along the way, blah, blah, blah.
all
But
right,
how do you
okay,
actually do it?
okay.
And so it kind of relates to what I said earlier in that instead of thinking we have to have the whole plan first,
Mm-hmm.
be confident that you can learn your way forward. And the way that we learn our way forward is through that AAA that I shared, the act, assess, and adapt.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've done is I've kind of taken something that we talk about like, oh yeah, just learn what you need to learn and say, okay, well, how?
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually learn your way forward? And so it took me a while to really put that into a process, but that's what that is. But it's also not only is it the methodology, but it's that whole philosophy that I can learn what I need to learn as I move forward.
Mm.
So I don't have to have the whole plan before I start.
Oh, okay, okay. Makes lots of sense. Lots of sense. You talked about when we first got started. The doctor, telling you that you only had a 3% chance of a full recovery. So I
Hmm.
think we've got a pretty good feel for that, because your position is, don't focus on that 97% of the ones who didn't uh, recover, but focus on the 3% of the ones who recovered. And I guess that's still a part of this learn your way forward, I would assume. So
Hmm.
there's some other things I want to kind of ask you about, and that is, I sense there are some fundamental truths that you have come to grips with during your coaching experience, your background, and uh, you name where you say that uh, you talk about three fundamental truths, or maybe I should put it that way. Uh, what are they?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that. The three fundamental truths. Earlier, when I said about that, when I was 23 and I would barely keep my head above water, it was a New Year's Eve. I'd worked my two jobs. I was exhausted. I went home to my little apartment and I thought, I was sitting there on the couch and I thought to myself, how did my life end up this way? Because I was a good student in high
Mm-hmm.
school. I'm a hard worker. I'm working really hard. Why, how did my life end up here? Because I was on a road to nowhere and I was getting there
Mm-hmm.
fast. I was eating tuna fish and macaroni salad like 5 nights a week because that's all I could afford, because I had to make the decision, do I eat or do I put gas in the car so I can go to my jobs?
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there in my dark little apartment and I asked that question, how did my life end up this way? And the answer that came back to me was that your life is a reflection of the choices that you've made so far.
Mm.
And at first, I have to say that wasn't the answer I wanted because at 23, I think I wanted someone that I could blame.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, but wait a minute, think about how hopeful that really is.
Mm.
Because if my life truly is a reflection of the choices that I've made so far, what that means is that when I make better choices, I can get a better result. And so out of that came my three fundamental truths. And the first one is that the future can be changed.
Mm.
It doesn't matter. Sometimes some people call it our predictable future, right? The path we're on, we have a predictable future from that point forward, which is basically more of the same. And we often think that we can't change that, but we can. So, number one, the future can be changed. Number two is that you can change your future. You don't need someone else to change it for you.
Mm.
One of the big epiphanies I had on that New Year's Eve was that no one was going to come knock on my door and say, Bobbi, let me get you out of this. I needed to do that work. And more importantly, I could do that work.
mm,
That's inspiring
mhm,
when we decide, I am my own hero,
mm, mm.
you know? And then the third one, you're probably not going to be surprised, but the third one is that you can learn what you need to learn along the way.
Mm.
So
Okay.
that's my three fundamental truths and where those came from. And it's
Wow.
been reinforced in all the coaching that I've done.
Exciting. Very, very exciting. You know, listening to you today and all that you have said has really just touched something within me to make that that even makes me want to look at stuff in a different way. And I guess that's what it's all about. We have these conversations with such great guests. We both share with each other, and you've definitely shared with me today. And I know there are some things along your life that have made the difference. And so, as we bring this to a close, I do want to just ask, what are some of the key events, and maybe you've already said it, in your life that set you on the path that you're on?
Some of the key events, I'm going to say that there were two. And certainly the illness and all that, those are
Mm,
important.
mhm,
Um, one was something that happened back in, high school. Because I had the speech problems and the speech problems lasted for years, I hated speaking in public.
mhm,
Like I hated it, like in grade school when you'd have to get up in front of the class and
mhm,
say anything.
mhm,
Hated it. So when I was in the eighth grade, I thought I have to get over this fear of speaking in public, even though I still had speech problems. And so I decided I was going to take a speech class, a public speaking class. So I took the public speaking class, and my teacher was Mr. Jordan. And Mr. Jordan, just coincidentally, also happened to be the coach for the speech and debate team. And my high school actually had a really good speech and debate team. Like they frequently went to state. And so I gave my first presentation, and I was all fired up about it, and it was terrible. It was an absolute train wreck. I don't think anybody could understand a word I said. It was really really
mhm,
bad. And when class ended that day, Mr. Jordan said to me, he's like, Bobbi, could you stick around for a minute? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I've done so bad. He's going to tell me not to come back, you know? But instead, he said to me, he's like, have you ever considered joining the speech and debate team? And I remember I just looked at him for like what felt like a minute. And I said, Mr. Jordan, were you in the room for that presentation?
mhm,
Because that was bad. That was a train wreck.
mm,
And he kind of chuckled a little bit and he said, yeah, he goes, it wasn't very good, but he said, you have potential.
mm.
And he said, I think with your potential and your work ethic and my coaching, you can be really, really successful.
Wow. Wow. Powerful. Powerful.
And that was life changing.
Mm, mm. Well,
It set me on the path of coaching, and it showed me the kind of person I wanted to be for others.
mm, powerful. Well, there you have it. Bobbi Kahler, who believe that there is always a way forward. She has appeared in articles for Forbes, uh, the Today Show, Yahoo News, Thrive Global, Authority Magazine, and Influence. I mean, she is just awesome. And I just want to just say to her again, thank you for agreeing to be a guest on the Deal by Me podcast. We enjoy having you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. This is awesome.